Welcome to Dialogue, a true crime conversation. I'm your host, Rebecca Sebastian, and this is a weekly true crime interview podcast. Welcome if you're new here. Hello again if you are returning. We're going to continue on our series about surviving and personal safety, which from what I'm hearing back from you guys, it's really resonating. I know it is for me, so I'm really glad to hear that. And I always want your feedback of which episodes, guests, and seasons are particularly impactful for you. So always feel like you can get in touch with me. You can find me across platforms at Dialogue Pod. You can drop me an email. Go to my website, rebeccasebastian.com. There's a form there. So today we're going to continue on our journey of survivors. And have I got a survivor for you? Kara Robinson Chamberlain has an incredible story to tell.
In 2002, I was 15 years old, and I was actually kidnapped from my best friend's front yard by a stranger. And he put a gun to my neck. He did not send up any of the red flags about being creepy or scary. And he took me from her front yard in the middle of the day. A neighbor actually saw me get into the car, so it didn't raise any red flags for him. And he took me to his apartment where he held me for 18 hours.
And I want to say thank you to my friend Michelle, who alerted me to Kara's TikTok, which depicted a video that Kara and I will talk about in great detail. I think I'm going to just let Kara tell her story because she deserves that. And it was an amazing conversation for such a harrowing tale. Kara has a lot of brightness to her, a lot of light and levity, and I really think this is going to resonate with you. So without further ado, here is the amazing Kara Robinson Chamberlain. Kara, welcome to Dialogue Podcast. I am so happy this worked out that we could talk today.
I'm so happy to be here.
You know, you have a story and a lot of people know it because you've shared it on TikTok, and that's a place where things get shared and go viral, which happened to you, and we will get there. But for any of my listeners who maybe haven't heard the big version of your story yet, could you just share what happened to you in 2002, and then we'll kind of talk about how that led to us having a conversation tonight.
Absolutely. Yeah. And in 2002, I was 15 years old, and I was actually kidnapped from my best friend's front yard by a stranger. And he put a gun to my neck. He did not send up any of the red flags about being creepy or scary. And he took me from her front yard in the middle of the day. A neighbor actually saw me get into the car, so it didn't raise any red flags for him. And he took me to his apartment where he held me for 18 hours. I was sexually assaulted multiple times. And he gave me drugs, and he would have killed me. And I decided that I didn't like that option. And I was going to essentially outsmart him. And while he was asleep, I was actually able to escape the restraints that were around my wrist and my leg, where he had restrained me to the bed. He was asleep in the bed next to me. And I was able to escape the restraints and get out of his apartment without waking him up. And I ran out of his apartment. There were two guys in a car driving through the apartment complex. I ran out in front of the car and asked them to take me to law enforcement. And they took me to law enforcement, where I was able to give them all of the information that I had gathered and memorized while I was in the apartment. So, you know, his doctor and his dentist, and what their phone numbers were, and the serial number that was on the inside of the container that he transported me in. The fact that he lived with a woman lived there, and she had long red hair, and just lots of details that they were able to use to identify the person that had kidnapped me. He was on the run for about 3 days, and they identified him. They went in, he had left his apartment. They searched his apartment, and when they did that, they found a locked footlocker that contained some newspaper clippings and a lot of other things. And when they were looking at those, they thought, this might be something bigger than just Kara. And they were able to positively identify him as the person responsible for at least 3 previous murders 6 years before I was kidnapped, so in 96 and 97 in Virginia. So they started, doing that research while he was still on the run. About 3 days after I escaped, his sister actually kind of set him up, and he was supposed to be meeting her in Florida, and law enforcement were alerted, and they put out like a traffic stop. Essentially, they put out stop sticks, and he saw them, and he ran through the stop sticks, blew his tires out. They sent in a canine who bit his arm, and whenever the canine let go of his arm, he shot himself. So he committed suicide. And yeah, so that's kind of the beginning of this story and this life that I live now. Following that, like I said, he was positively identified as the person responsible for at least those 3 murders in Virginia. And I became close with law enforcement through the whole process, and I ended up working in law enforcement. I worked there I worked there all through high school and college, and then went on to be a school resource officer, an investigator, victims advocate up until I had children. And so now I'm here, and I'm doing this, and I'm talking to you.
There's so much there, but I have to wonder, in the initial, right after this attack and everything happened, I'm a parent, and I'm a little bit older than you, but I can both imagine being at a friend's house and something happening, and now being a parent. The only thing worse than something happened to your own child, I feel like, is having something happen to a child who's under your care, who isn't your child. How are your family relationships with that friendship and the girl whose house you were at? Was there healing between your families? Was it terrible? Can you talk about that at all?
Yeah, I don't feel like there was any sort of rift there ever, because it was a complete stranger abduction. There was really nothing that could have been done to prevent what happened to me. So it was just a total case of, this was a person that planned his attacks, and he planned his victims out, and I was not his intended victim. That was not my house. I shouldn't have been there. So it was totally just wrong place, wrong time.
It's unbelievable, because we've almost gotten to the point where we comfort ourselves by saying that doesn't happen that often. And it doesn't. It is rare. But the fact that it did, I don't know how you get your head around that. And then I guess you have to go on your path of healing and recovery, which I know you talk about a lot and you share a lot now. How and when did that start? Were you at 15 able to confront this on a deep level for your own, psychological care?
I think the interesting thing about healing is that, just like the trauma and how we experience that, you and I could experience 2 very similar situations, and we would handle those situations and we would heal from those situations drastically different. So for me, for a very long time, my, I guess, methodology for processing what happened to me was just to talk about it. I was always able to just talk about it. So it actually became a point of contention for me often, that people would talk about me instead of to me about what happened. So that was a big issue for me in high school. I was in high school. I had to go back to school, a couple months later, and we didn't have a gigantic high school by any means. So that was always a point of contention, but it was a big point of healing for me, is that I was just able to talk about it. I didn't want anyone to treat me any differently. I just wanted to be the same person. So that was a path of healing for me then. Now, here we are. Here I sit almost 19 years later, and I can tell you from a more mature, more healed stance that was me continuing the coping mechanism that I established to get through the trauma, which was, I dissociated very heavily through the trauma. Most of the people that you will see out that are public speaking, that are, quote, dealing well with their trauma, they dissociated through their trauma. And so even when you hear me talk about it, there's very little, it's very much a flat affect. There's very little emotional involvement in me telling my story, because I shut that side of my brain off. So for me, I thought for a very long time, hey, I'm doing pretty well. Like I don't really have any lingering effects of this. And then having children made me realize how I feel like very much given the children sometimes that you need to heal. My first child is a very in touch with his emotions, and he's very emotional. And I was not. I had no emotions. And so I began to realize, like, seeing my other friends who were parents and seeing how they handled their children, I was like, I don't feel anything.
Wow.
So I was so used to suppressing all of my emotions that that's all I knew how to do. And that was my only coping mechanism. So that was my biggest, I feel like the biggest thing that I had to cope with and overcome. And really, I think just like a lot of things, the awareness of it being an issue was the biggest step for me for healing. So I became aware of it, and I just slowly but surely over the past 4 years have started to feel more feelings. And that's just been an internal thing that I've been able to do. And also just really sitting with my body and being in my body where I am has been a life lesson for me. And I think fitness has helped me a lot in that way, because you can't, you know, if you're doing a hard workout, you can't really be anywhere else. Like, you have to, it forces you to be in touch with your emotions and your body. You know, you're like crying because you can't lift something. You're like, why is this the issue? It's not really the weight, right? So, so those are the biggest paths for me that I have gone through with healing, and I'm not done yet.
No.
It's a lifelong journey.
For all of us, absolutely. And it's not linear, which is something that I'm
Exactly.
really coming to grips with.
Yeah.
But for the feeling emotions, for someone who's incredibly emotive, who overfeels feelings, who's a 4 on the Enneagram profile, if you know anything about the Enneagram.
I do. I love it.
I don't feel feelings. I am feelings.
Yeah. Yes.
So getting centered in your body, like, what else would you tell someone who does have that block, or maybe has some trauma, that is realizing that there's a disconnect between their feelings and themselves and maybe their cognitive thoughts? So a physical presence, what else can you do to actually I can't even imagine. I like wish I could shove them back sometime. How do you bring them out?
You know, I think for me, the biggest thing that I realized is I wasn't suppressing all of my emotions. When you suppress your emotions, there's one that always seems to bubble up, and it's anger.
Yeah.
And I felt just rage all the time. So it was really this process of like, what's underlying the rage? And for me, a lot of that, now this is where a lot of people, I would defer to a therapist, because therapy is a great tool. For me, I was able with my own intuition to kind of work through this in my own mind. But I tend to be, if you see, you know, the content that I put out, I tend to like be very therapy minded myself. So I was able to basically therapy myself. Mm-hmm. And I think that can be kind of rare, but I was looking at what underlies this rage. Why do I feel so angry? And for me, a lot of it was centered around a loss of control. So really just kind of sitting with that. And I did do quite a bit of some of the more alternative things like tapping, EFT, emotional freedom technique, which is one of those things that the first time I heard about it, I was like, what? That is weird. There is no way that can work. But it's one of those things you're like, well, what? It's free. It's easy. Yeah. Let's just try it.
Okay. What is the process? Can you explain it?
Yeah. So it's basically, you have these, and I am not an expert, but you have different areas on your body. So like, you start with like the side of your hand, and they innervate different parts of your body, and you just kind of speak through the things that you're feeling. You're like, I am feeling out of control right now. And then there's like spots here, and I of course can't remember the order. But you tap on all the spots while you talk through like what you're feeling. You're like, I am feeling out of control because of this. And it just kind of, something happens. It like forces different parts of your brain to communicate while you're sending signals through your nervous system. It is the craziest, weirdest thing. But I tell people all the time, like, why not try it? It's free.
Right. What do you have to lose?
Right. Like therapy is a fantastic tool to have in your pocket, but therapy is not accessible. So many healthcare plans don't cover it. It is so expensive. I mean, even myself recently, I've been like, okay, let me go and like, maybe I should get therapy just to be kind of preventative as I'm working through my documentary and all of these other things. And I was like, I can't afford it. My insurance doesn't cover it. And I'm like, I can't afford it. It's like $80 a session, and and that was the least expensive, and you don't want the least expensive option, right? like so I am a big fan of things like EFT. Meditation has been a great tool for me for controlling my rage, especially. Gratitude journaling is something that's so insanely simple that you're like, there's no way this could help, but I notice a difference in my mental stability and my ability to find joy in a week of gratitude journaling. And it's not, I don't sit down and like, today I am grateful for, some days I'm just like, I'm grateful for coffee and I am grateful for the sun shining today. Like sometimes it is not cerebral, let's say that. And yeah. And like I said, physical fitness and exercise really has been a big part of my journey. It helps me kind of organize my thoughts. I have this image of my brain just being like a box that you just dump a big barrel of bouncy balls in. And I feel like my thoughts are just like, ding, 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 ding. Yes. Yeah. And my husband will be like, I think you need to go work out. I'm like, I think you're right. And then I'll go work out and I come inside and I'm like, everything makes sense now. Like it just kind of orders things for me and helps me to just exist in my body.
Have you read the book or heard of the book, The Body Keeps the Score?
Oh yes.
Yeah.
I love it.
I'm thinking,
I love it so
okay,
much.
I'm so embarrassed because I bring it up or it gets brought up on the podcast all the time. And I'm like a
it's
quarter
so
of the
critical.
way through. It's such an essential resource. I haven't finished it because it's dense and it's very, heady. And I need to just move my way through it and figure it out.
No, I feel you. I haven't finished it either because you open it and you're like, the words are so tiny and they're like margin to margin. I was like, oh, this is dense.
That's exactly right. I'm so glad you're saying it because I sound like a broken record. Like I'm always copping out of reading it, but also you have to unpack every page. Like there's so much in it. You have to process.
It's so informationally dense.
Yeah. But what you're describing is just so key. It's like that trauma gets bottled up in the body and you have to find, and I don't mean you, the collective us, like we have to find a way to work it out. And it sounds like you've found that way, which I'm just so thrilled to know and to hear for myself. It's a good encouragement to me because even just anxiety, general anxiety, I know is lessened by physical activity and I still resist it because that's just
because it's hard to do. And I think regularly, if you listen to podcasts about people trying to overcome anxiety and trauma, like I listened to one somewhat recently and two different people were talking about their childhood traumas. And they're like, what is the one thing that you would never give up? Like that you would pick if you could only do one thing for your mental health and your anxiety and all of these things. And across the board, they were like physical fitness, exercise, like without a doubt. That's the one thing that just kind of like grounds me and centers me. So
no, that's such a good reminder. Okay, so you mentioned law enforcement and I'm so glad you brought it up because as we mentioned at the beginning, you are on TikTok and I think it's one of those posts about you in a criminal justice academy that was one of the first ones to go viral. Is that right?
Yeah, I think it was definitely one. It's one of my videos that has the most views still.
Yeah. So you're in it. It's so hard to describe a TikTok, right? Because it's very visual.
Right. If you don't know the trends and
Yeah. But why don't you explain that one in particular? Because it's really kind of a like OMG moment.
Yeah. And it was very much an OMG moment in real life too. So I think the trend was like that moment when, or is one of those trends. And sometimes I get these divine inspiration moments and I was like, oh, this one will be perfect. Sometimes I'm like, I don't know what to post. But I was like, this is going to be perfect for this. So when I was in the academy, I went to the Criminal Justice Academy and we had a very close-knit class. And I basically did a TikTok video of this moment of me being in class. And I remember distinctly coming back to class after lunch and we were, getting ready to start a new like section. And we come in and we sit down and the instructor's like, today we're, the first thing is a photo of the 3 girls that were murdered by my captor. So it's like we come in and we're sitting down and that's just like up there. And I was like, oh no. I was like, this is about me. And I had really not told people in general. And it wasn't because it was hard for me to talk about, because like I said, I just would talk about it if people wanted to know. I just felt like it made other people uncomfortable, and I didn't like to make other people uncomfortable. And so my last name had not been out. So it's just Kara. So the instructor's like, and no one knew what happened to these 3 girls until this girl in South Carolina named Kara. And I was like, and there were like 2 or 3 people in the class that were like,
you're Kara? Yeah. Is it our Kara?
Yeah. Yeah. And so after class, I went to the instructor and I was like, hey, I just wanted to let you know that Kara, and I like pointed at it and I was like, is Kara. And I like pointed at myself. And she was like, she just kind of stared at me for a second. She was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. And she was like, did I get everything right? And I was like,
talk about a fact check.
Yeah, I was like, yeah, I mean, mostly. I was like, she was
gosh.
like, oh my God. So they told the other staff at the academy and they were like, we actually want to give you an award at your graduation for everything that you've accomplished. And I was like, well, I got to tell my class first. So I like got the whole class together and I was like, cause you know, we were really tight knit and I don't want them to be like, what the heck is she getting an award for?
Right.
We've been here with her the whole time. She's been doing the same thing we have.
Right.
So I told them and they were just all floored. And
it was mostly men, right? Mostly young men.
Yeah, at that point, I was the only female left in the class.
Wow.
Yeah, so I was the assistant class leader.
So timeline-wise, how many years after your attack was this?
This was, so 2002 was when I was kidnapped. That was in 2010.
Okay, so just 5 years later.
No, 2002.
Oh, 8 years later.
Yeah.
It's hard. Sorry.
Like,
I'm thinking 2005. Yeah. 8 years
I'm
later.
like, I'm the same. I'm like, mathing. It's
remember feelings. I feel like it was around a decade. Okay.
I am not an Enneagram 5.
Oh, that's so funny. So was the interest in law enforcement in you prior to the trauma that happened to you in 2002, or did it develop out of that experience?
I love the way you asked that question. I'm going to say that because a lot of people want it to be like this, like, oh, did you go into law enforcement for this? And I'm like, well, it's not that pretty. Like it never is. It's not like some, vendetta or like some vigilante thing that I did. But I definitely would have never ended up in law enforcement if it weren't for this. And that's actually where I met my husband. So I never would have ended up where I am. But I very much formed a relationship with the sheriff of the county that I escaped from, where I was recovered, and he took me under his wing and he treated me like a daughter. He has 4 daughters, and so he just treated me like his extra daughter. And and so I worked there through the summers, through high school and college, and then I went on to work there. I got ready to graduate, and I was like, I think I'm gonna like go and be a teacher. And the sheriff was like, well, if you want to do that, we'll always support you. But if you want to stay here, you'll always have a job doing whatever it is that you want. And he was like, you should consider being a school resource officer. And I was like, all right, I'll give it a shot. Why not? And I did it. And I was like, oh, I really like this.
Oh, wow.
I really like law enforcement. And then at the academy, I was like, oh, this is really fun. So I really just kind of fell into it. It's just kind of silly to say, but then I just fell in love with it. And it's, people that are in law enforcement, people that are like in the army, they can understand those kind of jobs where you're like risking your life regularly. There's this camaraderie and I was a part of a family. Like that was the family that I grew up in. So it was just like natural for me to continue on that path. And I loved it while I did it.
Yeah. And then did you just feel like it was a natural ending when you became a parent, that wasn't a lifestyle you could envision with parenting, or why did you move away from it?
Yeah, so my husband actually works out of the country like 2/3 of the year now.
Oh,
and
wow.
so when I had my oldest, he's 7.5 now. So when I had him, I was like, I don't really want to go back to work. I was like, I don't want someone else to hear his first word and see the first time he walks. I was like, I want that. And so my husband went back to this job that he's doing now that he had done previously. And I stayed home. I was going to keep my certification up, so that I could keep that door open if I ever wanted to go back. So at the time, what I had to do to maintain my certification was to go to like, they call it week-long training. And I was like, my husband's out of the country. I have an infant.
Yeah.
Like there's no way I could do that. So my certification ended up lapsing, and I was like, you know, it's okay. I still have the connections and I still have the things that I loved. And now's a weird time to be in law enforcement. And, you know, so the last couple of years, I was like, I'm okay with letting that have been part of my story,
Right.
and letting it be part of my past.
Right. Right. And now there's this whole new part of your story. So talk to me about the moment when you're like, I'm going to take it to TikTok, like, and start communicating there, because you're natural on it. You're great. I find TikTok really confusing. I know I'm a little old for it. I still love it and, you know, scroll endlessly. So I appreciate it. How did that idea come to you? And then let's then talk about the evolution of what you're doing there and how amazing it is.
Yeah. So, you know, there was this process after I met Elizabeth Smart and I did a couple of things with her. I realized that I had done public speaking before I had kids, and I stopped when I had my oldest. I was like, okay, I think I'm just going to let that be part of my past again. And I met Elizabeth and I was like, I really want to do this. Like, I want to make a go of this. I want to do public speaking. I want to help as many people as possible. And so for me, I realized that the path to that is people had to know who I was. And I was like, how are they going to know who I am? And I was like, well, social media is a tool that exists. And I was like, I can try that. And so I kind of like did some stuff on Instagram, but I feel like Instagram, it's like standing at the bottom of the Grand Canyon and like trying to get someone's attention at the top. You're just like a small fish in a big pond.
Yeah.
And then TikTok came out and I was like, small pond, like, let's start here. And so I just started making videos, and a lot of my earlier videos were me like going chronologically through my capture, my kidnapping, and my escape with my captor, and going kind of like minute by minute. So it was on the 18th anniversary. And so I was going through that. And then I did my first viral video came out, and then it was just like a landslide from there. My first viral video was, you know, one of the put a finger down videos. And then people just had so many questions and they were so interested because, you know, people are always interested in true crime. And I feel like I have a unique perspective of having not only the perspective of the person who was a victim of a crime, but also having that perspective, having worked in law enforcement. I worked as an investigator for sexual assaults and child abuse cases. I was a victim's advocate. So like I have this unique perspective of having multiple visions of what that can look like. And I'm an Enneagram 9. So I see like all of the perspectives.
Beautiful. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that really resonated with a lot of people, and that I could speak to people in a way that conveys information while also having compassion and empathy and also getting the point across.
Hey listeners, there's an exciting event coming up that I want to make sure is on your radar. True Crime FilmFest is the first and only film fest in the United States dedicated to true crime stories. I had a feeling you would like that part. Submit your film on filmfreeway.com and follow them on Instagram at True Crime FilmFest. The first event will be held in January 2022 in Atlanta, Georgia. Tickets are already available because, guys, January is not even that far away. I don't want to talk about it, but it's true. Okay, True Crime Film Fest. Hope to see you there. Yeah, well, anecdotally, I'll tell you, my audience is primarily women, which you might be finding as well. True crime as a genre has mostly women consuming the content. Yeah. And what comes up here all the time is, you know, I'm always curious, like, as a woman, why are you so drawn to this rather dark subject matter? Right. And self-protection and this idea that maybe, just maybe, I'll remember something that will help me if, God forbid, I'm ever in a similar situation. So I'm just so excited you're here because I'd love to get some of those and share them. And we can point people to your TikTok channel where they can find tons more. I'm sure you've learned so much. I'm in awe that you were 15 and had the wherewithal to get out and to know how. Yeah. The other thing that comes up here all the time is flight fight, or freeze. And I think I'm a
Yeah.
freezer. So the idea
Mhm.
that you concocted a plan and executed says so much about who you are. So I've got to know, like, if there was just one piece of advice to avoid capture specifically or escape capture, do you have that? Is there one paramount thing?
So I think that this can be a tricky question to ask people, but my answer is mostly, and this is not going to be what you expect, it's mostly that in my circumstance, there is really nothing that I could have done differently.
Yeah.
That person put a gun to my neck and he said he would shoot me if I screamed. Now, statistics tell us that if someone does that, and if you are in a situation like I was, a suburban area where there was a male neighbor outside in his backyard, if I would have screamed, he would have left me alone and he would have left. However, I cannot give people that advice. I can tell you, of course, like, fight if you're able, but when you feel the cold metal of a gun up against your neck, you can't do it. Most people are going to be physically incapable of that. Not only that, even if you did, you might have the sociopath who's like, well, I'm not getting caught today, like, and shoots you. So I think that it is important to note that. And I hate to say that, like, if it's going to happen to you, there are things that you can do to prevent yourself from looking like, and I'm using air quotes, looking like a victim, right? There are things that you can do, which are pieces of advice that I've given people. However, if something is going to happen to you, really the best thing that prepared me is that I had a plan going in. Where did that plan come from? I don't know. Call it intuition, call it divine intervention, call it whatever you want. But before I went into that situation at 15 years old, no one had ever talked to me about this. I was like, if I am kidnapped one day, this is what I will do. I will wait on that person to become complacent. I probably didn't think the word complacency. I was 15. However, that was my plan, is that no one can remain vigilant and in a constant state of readiness for a long period of time. So when most people ask me, how did you do that at 15? Well, that's why. And they teach you that in law enforcement as well. And that's how my dad taught me how to drive. It's that, you're going into a situation with a plan on your out. So on law enforcement, a reaction is always slower than an action, right? So if you already have your reaction planned, if you say, okay, if this happens, I'm going to do that. I think that's planning for your escape and your survival, which the human need to survive astounds you whenever you experience it. When I was in the academy, I heard a man that came in and spoke to our class who got shot point blank range, law enforcement officer, and was able to walk a mile so that he could call for radio backup. And I remember thinking, like, I don't know if I could do that. Like, that is a will to survive. And then, like, up against the side of my head, I'm like, oh, you already did it. Like, you've already done that. So I would say don't underestimate the will to survive. And you hear these stories consistently of people, escaping a captor because the captor becomes complacent. And I think that for me, that was a big part of my survival. And I think, like I said, it's tricky because we all want to do things to protect ourselves, to not become a victim, but we have to be very careful with questions like that because we don't want to make victims, but we also need to be more aware of not making predators.
Oh,
you know what I mean?
yeah. Yeah.
Like, why is the onus on us all the time
Sure.
to not be a victim?
Well, yeah.
Which is like a whole societal thing, right? Like, that's
Yes. And it's the way we address sexual assault too. What can women do to be safer? Well, what can we be teaching men about not going out and date raping? Like, we've gone the wrong. So yeah, I'm so glad you're saying this the way you're saying this.
Like I said, it's probably not the answer you expected and not necessarily a concrete piece of advice, but it's the way I feel and it's true to my heart.
Well, I really appreciate that. That's all I want. And that resonates, but it does sound like there's some preemptive thought process that may or may not have even been conscious for you, but maybe that is something we do have an advantage with as true crime consumers with these stories. Like there is that little,
Absolutely.
somewhere in the back of the brain that's going to kick in. But you do talk about not looking as much like a victim. So in the ways that we can empower ourselves, the last guest I had on, he wrote The Power of Awareness. And he said, your personal safety is your chief responsibility and nobody else's. And forget the captor or an assailant. It's like not my husband's, it's not my mom's, it's not my coworkers or my neighbors or the guy on the street, the neighbor, right? You do want him to come in, but ultimately it's you. So I saw one of your videos, you were out running and you talked about like 3 things that you do to not look like a victim or to give the message to someone that not today, buddy, like it's not going to happen. What are those things for you?
So I think the awareness is a huge point. Like you said, being aware of your surroundings. So like I'm wearing headphones right now. I would never wear headphones like in both of my ears and run, even if they were the ones that are the hear through. Like I still would never wear headphones in 2 ears.
That came
I
up
think,
with our
yeah,
guest, and I got a big talking to about it. So.
yes, yeah, don't do it.
Yeah.
Definitely, I know a lot of people like to do things like listen to a true crime podcast while you're running, but if you're going to be like so involved in that you're not going to be aware of your surroundings, don't do it.
Yeah.
And then I think that, and we can all picture this if we think back to, like the 80s, like high school movies, right? You have like the jock that walks through the halls with like his shoulders back and his head held high, right? And then you have like the computer dork who is like sitting there like all hunched over and like looking at his feet when he walks.
Right.
Which one is a nefarious person gonna choose? Right? They're not gonna pick the person who's holding their shoulders back and making eye contact.
That surprised me, Kara, when I heard you say that in your video, because I live in New York City and I avoid all eye contact at all costs. Like best case scenario, they're going to ask me for directions, which I don't have time for, frankly. And worst case, you're going to hit a crazy person. So you're saying that shows like a lack of fear is the connection.
Yeah.
You're not afraid.
And it also, right. And it also shows that you're paying attention to your surroundings. And you're not going to be caught unaware and that you saw them. Right. They're not going to pick somebody that looked them in the eyeballs. Like, again, it's like I said earlier, the statistics tell you that is true.
Right.
100% of the time, is that true? No. But statistics tell you that if you look confident and you look like you're going to put up a fight, or you might be able to identify them, or you're not going to go down easy. And I think that there are a lot of ways to build that confidence. If you have to fake it, fake it. If you can't fake it and you need to build that confidence, take some self-defense classes. Yeah. You'll get some confidence, work out, like build some muscles. Like don't be afraid to build muscles. I know Elizabeth Smart, one of the things that she said, like she loves to run. And it's like, maybe you become a better runner so that you know that if somebody tries to get you, like, at least I know I can run from them.
Right.
So like whatever helps you to build that confidence and just remind you like, hey, I'm a strong woman and I'm not going down today. Whatever that looks like for you, do it and build your confidence.
Yeah.
Unapologetically do it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think also not being afraid of appearing rude. That comes up a lot too. It's like,
yeah,
we don't have time for that either.
Yeah. I don't care. One of the things that in law enforcement, they taught us at the academy is, you're putting yourself in harm's way quite often. It's like at the end of the day, like who's going home to their family? Like you want to go home to your family at the end of the day.
That keeps it very focused.
Yeah.
I'm going back to when you were talking about in high school that people were kind of talking around you and about you and not to you. And that made me wonder, for those of us who, hopefully don't ever experience something as traumatic as this, somebody we know might. What is the most helpful thing a friend, a loved one, a sister could do for someone who's experienced something traumatic like this? And what's like the worst thing? And again, I know you can only speak for yourself, but generally, what do you advise? How do we show up for somebody?
I think one of the most hurtful things for me is what shapes this answer. And it's people walking on eggshells around me. And so the worst thing in the world for me is the thing that comes naturally to most of us when they share something very vulnerable. and it's, I'm so sorry that happened to you.
Yeah.
Like, do not say you're sorry. Like, I don't want you to feel, and that's why I didn't tell people for a long time, because I didn't want them to, there is this look that comes over people's face whenever they find out. And it's just like, I mean, like a door shutting, and where they're just like, holy crap. Like, I don't even know how to respond to this. I'm so sorry that happened. And I'm like, I don't want you to feel sorry for me, because it is what made me who I am. And it's what put me where I am. So I was pushing that message on TikTok, like, don't say you're sorry to people. Like, that's not helpful. That's not empowering. And I was like, well, I probably need to give them something that they do
Yes,
need.
please.
Like, that would be the positive thing to say. So I think a lot of the time, the safest thing to say is, thank you for sharing that with me. Thank you for feeling safe enough with me to share that.
Yeah.
If it's something that it's like a first disclosure, they've not told anybody, I think it's so important to say, thank you for sharing that. I believe you. And ask them, like, how can I support you? They might not know, but they might. And I think that kind of leaves it open in their hands, because again, trauma and how people experience trauma, it's vastly different. So the things that were helpful for me are not going to be helpful for a lot of people. So letting them take the lead, and really choosing your words to be words of empowerment and building people up. So I was kidnapped from one county and I escaped from the neighboring county. And so I had interactions with 2 law enforcement agencies, and the sheriff of agency number 1 that I was taken from was very much like the good old boy Southern sheriff. And, you know, I met him 24 hours after escaping. He's at my mom's house, and he said, you know, that guy was going to kill you, right? Like, you know, you should be dead right now. And so there's your, right. So there, now, was that true? Probably. Is that appropriate to say to a 15-year-old? No. Does that empower someone? No. So I think choosing the words that empower. So then you have the flip side of the coin, which is the sheriff that I ended up working for, where he gave me an award for bravery. He took me to dinner where I could sit down and meet the 2 men that took me to law enforcement and like really know them. Like, he adopted me as a daughter. So you can look at those 2 ways that I was approached, of like empowerment versus treating me like a victim.
Yeah.
Right. So like treating me like a survivor and empowering me versus treating me like a victim.
That's such a crystal clear analogy, and the comparison really helps. And you're bringing up the 2 terms which come up here a lot as well, whether we're talking about cults or murder or kidnapping: victim, survivor. Yeah. I ask all my guests what they prefer, because technically many are victims of a crime. So that is a true description, but they've survived. Is it a messy middle mashup for you? Is it both? Is it not victim? Like, how do you think about those terms?
I think I don't feel as maybe passionate as some people do, but I do have an opinion about it, because I think for me, and I think I've softened a little bit on this over the last couple of years, because I've just become a little less extreme. But I used to regularly say in speaking engagements that I did not like to be called a victim, because calling me a victim implies that something was taken away from me. And I refused to give my captor the power to take anything else from me. He took 18 hours of my life, and that's all I'm going to allow him to take. I don't allow him to take up any more space. And so I gravitated more towards survivor. And I think that was crystallized for me a lot in working in victims assistance, where I was helping people, and the people that tended to have more of the victim mentality, they were harder for me to help, just emotionally and mentally. But the people that tend to be more survivor motivated, they tend to have better outcomes. So it's very much just like, okay, that is a thing that happened to me. It sucked. Like, we can say, hey, that crappy thing happened, but I'm not going to continue to let that thing define me. It's put me where I am, and it's making me who I am. But I choose not to let it define me. So for me, the difference between victim and survivor is, if I'm defined by that thing that happened to me, if I continue to let it shape me, versus do I choose to use it as a means to improve myself and to move on into a better place, which is more of a survivor mentality, in my opinion.
Yeah. So it almost seems like the term can be reflective of maybe what's going on inside the person sometimes.
It feels that way to me. And I don't know if that's just like my internalization
Right.
of what I experienced as a victim of a crime. I mean, I think it's okay. Like I was a victim of a crime, but when I speak of myself, I don't refer to myself that way. I'm
Yeah.
not defined by that. And then also as a victim's assistant personnel who is working with victims regularly. So I have that duality of seeing both of those perspectives.
Sure. So how does this impact your parenting? Do you think you're making decisions about what they can and cannot do based on what happened to you? Is it impossible to say because it did happen to you? So how else would you know? Talk to me about how you
Yeah.
think about safety and parenting, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's probably impossible to say
Yeah.
how I would parent differently, but I do tend to have more of the mentality of like we can do everything we can to protect ourselves, to protect our family, but sometimes stuff happens.
Yeah.
Right. So my children are a week away from being 5, so I'm just gonna say 5 and 7.5, and so they know in an age appropriate manner, and an appropriate amount of information that someone took mommy from her mom and dad when I was a little girl.
Okay.
And that's about all they know.
Yeah.
That's what's appropriate for them to know. And so I try to be very transparent with my children as I'm able to. I think it's very important for them to see, especially boys. I think it's very important for them to see like all of the spectrum of emotion and all of the reasons. And so I tell them that, and that helps them to understand why, like if they're playing in my front yard and I'm like, hey, I got to go inside and I got to go to the bathroom. They're like, oh, we'll just stay out here. I'm like, no, you're going to come sit right here because it can literally happen in a second. And I just think of, one of the families that both of their girls were kidnapped and murdered by this man, like in the same day. And I just think like, what would I do if something happened to both of my children? Like, I don't know how you survive that, honestly. I guess like you survive anything, but so they know that. I think I foolishly for a while was like, but I have boys, like it's not as like it is. It's just covered up more.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think I place a high value on consent with them and what that looks like from a young age. And again, especially because I have boys, like I'm trying to not raise perpetrators of violence in the future. So like even, if they're wrestling each other and one of them says, stop, I'm like, you don't keep going.
Yes.
You immediately stop.
Yeah.
That's it. And which is, it's hard, when you have family members who are like, give me a hug. And he's like, I don't want to give you a hug. I'm like, he does not have to hug you.
Yeah.
Don't make him hug you.
This is big. And this is such a new, I think, trend in parenting that I'm seeing of parents allowing their children to have agency over who they kiss and hug and say hello to.
Right.
And I'm going to sound like a grandmother right now, but my kids are older. They're 22, 18, and 16. Like even when my kids were little, I didn't feel like I could do that and disappoint a family member or what I assume is probably a safe person. But you are absolutely right to do that.
Even just learning the language of like, I think it's very tricky. And I think it is a huge positive thing that social media is doing right now is just like spreading this awareness of even, my youngest, his birthday is next week. And so I have to be careful with my language with my older child where I'm like, don't tell him. And I'm like, but adults don't tell you to keep secrets, right? Someone said that recently and I heard it and I was like, oh, you're right. So like, it's a constant learning process, even for me, of realizing how we shape that and how perpetrators groom children and what it looks like. And it's, secret keeping and don't tell mom, she'll be disappointed. So it's very much, for me, I try to be a safe space for emotions, which let me tell you is hard for someone who is not in touch with her emotions. I try to be a safe space for emotions, no matter what that might look like. And, let them know I will always love them no matter what, and really try to enforce consent. And I think those are really the, like laying the groundwork, the best things we can do, because again, you can do everything right, but stuff can still happen. So the best thing you can do is lay the groundwork for if something happens that you would be a safe space or that they would not keep a secret.
Yeah. That's brilliant. Okay, switching gears, there's a documentary coming out in the fall.
In the fall, September.
That's so soon,
probably.
which is wild.
I know, right?
I'd love to hear whatever it is you can share about it, what we might expect and where we might be able to watch it when the time comes.
Yeah, so it will be on Oxygen.
Oh,
Yeah, and it will be a 2-hour special. I am an executive producer
good,
along with
good.
I am at the point where I was like, I want control over my story. Like, I don't want anybody else to tell it in a way that I don't want it told.
So glad to
I've
hear
had
that.
I've had other offers that have come in since. And they're like, would you like to do this? And I'm like, not really. I kind of just want to have control over everything at this point in my story. So we go minute by minute with all of the different perspectives of people who were involved, and we walk through everything that happened. So we have my parents, we have my boyfriend at the time, the law enforcement that was involved, and just kind of walking through the story. And I've been watching it today, and it is,
It's going to be harrowing.
Emotional.
It's going to be so intense.
It's intense, but it is. I mean, there's something about seeing, I've never sat down with, the guy that I was dating at the time, he was my first love. And we were pretty serious. And I never heard his side of the story. I never heard my friend whose house I was at, her side of the story. I never heard my parents' side of the story. So I'm sitting here watching this and I'm hearing it all for the first time, like their perspectives. Oh, tears, all of the tears.
Like trying not to cry, just thinking about your parents.
Yeah. So I actually was messaging one of the producers, and I was like, you are making me feel feelings and I am not okay with it. I was like, I'm having so many emotions right now.
Oh, I can only imagine. And I know I keep referencing last episodes, and I apologize. It's just that I'm on this series around this conversation, and a woman who is a victim of a decade long of stalking, she's still dealing with her stalker, has become a victim's advocate. And another business she's trying to launch is consulting on sets in entertainment, where the care of a victim on set, this true crime industry that I know and love and I'm a part of, she says, has a tendency to profit on pain. Yes. And when they're not caring for the person, I'm sure you have, and so is she. And so she's really trying to right that wrong. So in addition to having somebody on set to care for the victim, taking on the role of an executive producer, another great way to just nip that right in the bud. I'm so happy.
That's beautiful. I will have to listen to that podcast and get her information and get in contact with her, because I love that.
Oh yeah, you should connect for sure.
Yeah, I have definitely experienced and felt that, where, like I said, when I talk about what I experienced, I very much talk about it the way I'm talking to you now. And I've done, interviews and things in the past where they're like, okay, now can you say that again? But just give me more emotion. Yeah. And I'm like, no, I can't. Oh. You get what you get. And I have just been floored and blown away with this team that I'm working with. When I was doing my filming, the producer that came here to do the filming, I was talking to her about it, and she was like, I would love to win an Emmy or whatever. She was like, but at the end of the day, she was like, if I did that and you were not happy with the project, she was like, I wouldn't sleep. She was like, all I care about is if you're proud of it and if you can stand behind it. And that's the entire team has been like that. Anything that I've come at them and I'm like, hey, I'm not comfortable with this, or, the families of the other girls, they want to not include this or include this. They have just 100% been like, okay, no questions asked, we will do it. And
this makes me so happy. This is truly making my day.
Yeah, it's amazing. I've just been floored. And I spoke to one of the producers and I thanked him. I was like, I really need to thank you for the way that you just handled everything. I'm just so happy with the way it's gone. And he's like, this is what we want to do. They worked with Elizabeth Smart. She's an executive producer on this as well. And they were like, it's in our benefit to treat you this way, obviously. Yes. They're like, but these are the kind of stories we want to tell. And we want to be known for, being able to work with people in a way that they are proud to stand behind it, which was a big reason why I pursued this. I pursued it because I wanted to get out. I wanted to, I have big goals and I have big dreams for my future. And I knew that the first step was to tell my story in a way that I was proud of and I could stand behind, because I quite often cringe when I see videos of myself or interviews that they have sensationalized and they've trumped up all these things. And everything that I've seen of this so far, I'm so proud of it. And I cannot wait for everybody to see it. I think it's this, just the quality, the content, the cinematography.
Maybe we could do a panel with you and some of the team. In the
I would
fall.
so love that.
Yeah, maybe in New York now that things are opening up. Oh, that would be so exciting.
Yeah.
Well, I'm thrilled. I can't wait. I so appreciate who you are, how you tell your story, and what you're doing with it. I'm honored that you're on the podcast. Before I let you go, I ask all my guests before they leave, what's getting you up in the morning? And this can be literal or figurative or both.
So literally it's my children, because they're up at the crack of dawn. They're like, it's daylight. I'm like, it's barely daylight. And then figuratively, I mean, honestly, it's coffee most days, because I'm an equal opportunity coffee lover. I love all things coffee. We have friends that have a roastery like a mile from the house.
Oh, perfect.
And so we have like the best coffee, hands down, that, our friends own the coffee shop. And so I'm a little spoiled, and that's honestly what it is most days.
That's my answer too. And when you were talking about people being asked what's the number one thing that they can't live without their resource, and you said if they're exercise, I was like, coffee. It would probably be coffee for me, which I know is not what we were going for.
I mean, but it just makes you so happy. It's not even about the caffeine for me. Like,
it's a ritual. It's
the ritual, and I get so much joy from it.
Same.
Like, it just makes me happy.
Same.
I will never give it up.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm right there with you. Kara, this was such a pleasure. Thank you so much for killing the small talk on DIE-ALOGUE.
Happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
DIE-ALOGUE is a Yellow Tape Media production edited by Jason Usry and produced and hosted by me, Rebecca Sebastian. Please be sure to subscribe to DIE-ALOGUE, a true crime conversation, wherever you listen to podcasts, and follow us on social media. We are at DIE-ALOGUE Pod across all platforms. You can also drop me a note or a guest suggestion or sign up for my newsletter at RebeccaSebastian.com. Be sure to join me every Wednesday for a new episode and another killer conversation. I am so excited to talk to you about Canva. Canva is a graphic design platform where you can create social media graphics, presentations, posters, documents, any visual content you need, you can make on Canva. I am in marketing and I have used Canva for years, way before they were a partner of DIE-ALOGUE Podcast. The Canva platform is free to use, but also offers a paid subscription called Canva Pro, which I use because I can upload custom fonts and my brand colors. Honestly, anything you need to do, you can do it on Canva. I make pitch decks, memes, my newsletters. Now, if you want to get in on Canva, listeners of DIE-ALOGUE can try Canva Pro for free for 45 days when you sign up via my exclusive link. That link is partner.canva.com/diehard. Don't worry, you don't have to remember it. It's in the show notes. So head over there, use that link, and start creating. Seriously, you're going to have so much fun. Partner.canva.com/diehard.